everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session on keys to gender equality and cultural policies. Thank you for being here in this second day of the UCLG Culture Summit. We believe that this session is important because gender equality is one of the greatest challenges of our times, but not only for that, but because it can help overcome and tackle other many challenges, such as violence, wars, climate emergency. Yesterday we named a few, and today we continue. We have, all of us, a responsibility in this issue, as individuals, as part of collectives, and also as cultural actors. But fortunately, culture is increasingly being recognized as part of the solution to the challenges of humanity. Culture has to do with creativity, innovation, heritage, memories, diversity, and also has to do with the values and the aspirations upon which communities are built. So this can bring us hope. Having this in mind, in this session, we are going to identify key challenges for gender equality with a cultural perspective. We are also deepen key factors for gender-sensitive, responsive, and transformative cultural policies. We're going to look at what kind of policies are cities and regions implementing. Are they intertwined with cultural rights, with gender equality, with care? What is the role of cultural actors in this endeavor? We are all women in this stage, but I invite everyone to take the floor during the Q&A segments, so we have a diversity of voices represented. So before moving to the first segment, I would like to briefly introduce the latest achievements, the latest activities and documents of UCLG as a leader of the global feminist municipal movement. The first of all is the Manifesto on the Future of Equality Beyond Beijing Plus 25 that was approved at the UCLG World Congress in Durban in 2019. The second one is the involvement in the CSW Days, which is the Commission on the Status of Women that annually gathers to monitor the condition of women and gender diverse groups worldwide. Third one, the localization reports to the high-level political forum, which are led by the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments, and which, in the case of SDG 5, was facilitated by UCLG women. Then the Gold reports, which are produced every 3 years by the UCLG research team. And in the last edition, Gold 6 was entirely devoted to inequalities with a rights-based and intersectional approach. And then the UCLG Decalogue for the SDG Summit that was held in September this year, which contains a full chapter dedicated to the feminist agenda and also to a culture goal. And of course, we cannot forget the Pact for the Future of Humanity, our big policy document now in UCLG, which puts equality at the center and which is articulated around care in public service provision and as the basis for the new social contract. And to conclude this brief speech, I would like to mention a concrete endeavor of the UCLG Culture Committee on this very topic, on gender equality and cultural policies. It was a report, Cultural Actions Supporting Gender Equality, which was produced in 2021 and written by Farida Shahid, UN former rapporteur in the field of cultural rights. And it was presented at the UCLG Culture Summit in Izmir in 2021 as well. And it is mainly based in the insights of UCLG members and partners that responded to an open call with a lot of generosity. I'm just going to mention 3 of the main findings of the report. We found out that every city has its narrative, and it's conveyed and is shown in the names of the streets, of the plazas, of the gardens, parks, buildings, and the use of them, and who is reflected and who is not in statues, monuments, popular celebrations, and other events, commemorations. These city narratives reflect societal inclusions and exclusions, and they are rarely gender inclusive and commonly exclude other marginalized groups. Second, it is not easy, unfortunately, to refashion deeply embedded gender notions and values which are formally expressed in policy documents may clash with traditional cultural paradigms and beliefs. But luckily enough, culture spaces and processes at local level are always sites for rethinking and for refashioning meanings and values. So that's why we are here for. And let's start, without further ado, with our first panel of wonderful speakers. Sorry, Catalina, can you move to the second slot? Sit here. Sorry. Yes, later I will call you. Yes, so No. Could you sit?
Okay.
Thank you. Later I will call. Doesn't work. Yes, thank you. Later I will call Catalina Valencia. Thank you so much, and sorry about the confusion for the second slot. Thanks. So my first question is to Beatriz García, member of the Cultural and Olympic Heritage Commission at the International Olympic Committee and former member of the European Capital of Culture Selection and Monitoring Panel. You direct also international academic research at the University of Liverpool. Our question for you is, what are the gender gaps existing in cultural fields in the world and across the European Union? Thanks. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. And yes, it would have been nice to keep the 5 minutes there, but well, we have, yes. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to speak about this topic. I think it's valuable to start by acknowledging, and I will focus actually on the European aspect rather than the worldwide take, because I feel we're going to hear also other angles after me. The culture sector is clearly very heavily, very well represented by women, and especially when it comes to workforce numbers and to audiences. But to this day, female positions remain lower paid and less prominent in leadership or decision-making spheres. No? So how is that evolving? I had the opportunity to be appointed as a lead expert and coordinator of Voices of Culture Structure Dialogue back in 2019. And this involved a very, very broad range of individuals representing countries across the European Union. A series of gaps and also underlying issues were identified. And I would like to reflect on that and also what has happened since. I believe there were five main areas that were identified. The first had to do with taking up leadership positions and decision-making in itself. And it's very interesting because obviously there are a few women that are in positions of power when it comes to culture, and they are getting a lot of visibility. So what is clear is that it's becoming an expectation to see women taking the stage, but we should not confuse that with this being representative of everything else that is going on. So we have more visibility of women that really are doing a lot and being very inspiring, but there are still lots and lots to do. And it changes quite a lot depending on the countries. So actually, when anything that I say is actually not happening in the same way across the board. The questions that emerge here is who are the gatekeepers, no? Who appoints, who and what chances exist out there to interrogate that. And in these conversations that we were having, the big demand was to say, well, how we can address this, whether we can have the 50-50 quotas in board compositions and so on. What are the kind of measures that could help address that in the first place? But ultimately, this first gap is associated to the second, which is the opportunities for career progression, and the fact that we still have very important glass ceilings there. Employment in the sector tends to be more precarious for women, despite the fact that at the time of graduation, you have a similar number of women, men, getting degrees and opportunities. So the starting point tends to be quite similar. And what we have is these systemic issues that have to do with work-life balance, with gender stereotypes, and obviously, maybe ultimately, the lack of reference. No? So how many women aspire for more or feel that they can get to really the top, if in many, many occasions and environments, you're maybe the first one to actually have these opportunities. So there were lots of conversations about the fact that, especially for women, there is a lot of need for validation and encouragement, and this links up to how maybe we are educated or cultural traditions. So this idea that there is a lot of need for mentoring schemes in a way that doesn't seem to be felt as necessary for men. So that's another very, very interesting debate. Why is it that many women feel the need for permission? No? They need to be told, oh yes, you should apply, rather than feel entitled to go for it. So this was an area that was discussed broadly. I believe a lot has changed. So obviously I'm a lot aware of more and more institutions developing mentoring schemes precisely. But obviously that takes a long time to see the effects of those initiatives. The third major gap is in terms of pay. So obviously key. So regardless of how far you go in your career, the fact that you are not going to get the same reward. So this association with gender stereotypes and the point that there is maybe a lower valorization of the kind of skills and abilities that a lot of the female contingent might offer. So again, this kind of valuing things and expertise in a different way, contributing to those gaps. So again, lots of discussions on potential solutions. We can see whether we have time for that on the Q&A. The fourth big gap, and again, lots of changes, particularly in the last 5-6 years, in terms of access to resources and the culture market. So interesting in terms of opportunities for exhibition and distribution of works by women or produced by women. It's lagging behind, but at the same time it's becoming there is demand for it. So it's becoming a good PR to actually provide opportunities. So we have far more, both in terms of film festivals, literary works in the visual arts sector and so on. There is more and more private initiatives that see the value of promoting the other side, the other stories. So again, in terms of visibility and discussion and the conversation, it's clear that across Europe, the awareness is there, the demand is there, but it's a very slow process. So we have to see in terms of how much more could be done to incentivize support from the private sector beyond the PR factor. And the ultimate, the last gap, in terms of the time that I have, is in terms of representation in public events and the public sphere. You were mentioning now, Marta, cities, no? Whether you see the sculptures of women, or who is celebrated as having made, what are the names of women on the streets or metro stations. Certainly in terms of conferences and panels, there is now an expectation, and in certain countries, where I'm based in the UK, it's now impossible to have panels that do not have a diversity of gender representation. And there have been a lot of gestures being made for people, even for men, to leave a panel if there is not at least one woman there. No? So this is something that is happening, not everywhere in Europe. So actually I have now been in certain events in 2 or 3 countries where actually no, there was not a lot of balance there. But there has been a lot of progress being made. Again, it's very important not to confuse that, which is the front, with the background, and the danger is that we become complacent. No? So if we see certain gestures being made in terms of communication, in terms of panel representation, that we feel that the problem is solved, the other gaps that we identified. So overall, by 2023, it's still far from a level playing field. It's not the same in every country or every sector, but there are some solutions. And again, the final bit that was discussed is how we accumulate data, get the evidence, and share it between each other. And how, obviously, thinking in the long term, mentoring and education schemes might help address and change something that is so deeply embedded that it's not something that we can expect for it to be solved, just in 5 or 10 years' time. So I leave the floor to the next speaker, and there is much more we could explore in terms of how we identify potential solutions for this.
Thank you, Beatriz.
Thank you.
For bringing to the table the gaps in terms of lack of visibility, representation, the need of validation, of permission.
Thank you.
And linked to stereotypes. Okay, so let's move now to our second speaker, Yari Camara. You are a policy researcher and writer based in Burkina Faso. And as a member of the UNESCO expert group on the 2005 Convention on the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, you have contributed to key documents such as the UNESCO report, Gender Equality, Heritage and Creativity, writing about gender dimensions in different creative sectors within the regional context of Africa. Our question for you, well, actually, in fact, 2 questions. What are the gender gaps existing in cultural fields in the world, but mainly in Global South? And what are the obstacles faced by women in the Global South to be active players in the creative sectors? Thank you so much. You have 5 minutes.
Yes. Thank you, Marta, for the question. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. So I will speak mainly to the African situation, which is a context that I know best. And let me also specify that, so as a researcher, I also provide policy advisory services to governments. And in my policy advisory work, I mostly work with African central governments. So I'm going to try to extrapolate what kind of lessons can be applied to local government making. So gender gaps exist because of societal norms, and societal norms are often slow to shift. Importantly for our panel this morning, cultural products, art and pop culture are actually some of the most powerful tools for shifting those societal norms. So that's also one of the things that is at stake when we talk about gender equality in the cultural field. Now, a lot of the gender gaps in terms of participation that Beatriz just presented also apply to varying degrees to African countries. So I'm going to use my 5 minutes to hone in on one particular obstacle. There are also structural barriers that are behind gender gaps. And in terms of lifting structural barriers, policymakers clearly have a role to play. So when we look at who is making cultural policy in many African countries, when I do my policy advisory work, I am often the only woman in the room. So it's in stark contrast to international conferences on cultural policy where the balance tends to swing the other way. And statistics confirm this observation of mine. There's an underrepresentation of women at the cultural policy level. So UNESCO, in its 2020 global report, highlighted that in the sub-Saharan African region, only 27% of the heads of National Arts Council or their equivalent were women, and it was 0% that year for the Arab states, so including North African countries. Compare that to 67% in Eastern Europe or 58% in Latin America and the Caribbean. And such imbalances extend to the positions of the ministers of culture and also the directorships of prestigious public-funded festivals. Now, male policymakers can and sometimes do make good policies for women, but often when there is a gender imbalance in who drives policy decisions, there is likely to be a blindness or reluctance to address certain key obstacles for women participation in the culture sectors, and one of these is sexual harassment. And sexual harassment is a pernicious problem, especially in the African context, because it creates obstacles at two levels. So obviously, it creates a toxic work environment for women and can push many women to drop out and give up pursuing a career in the arts. And I think on that level, this challenge plays out in many similar ways in the global north. However, in an African context, the prevalence of sexual harassment also discourages many women from attempting a career as an artist in the first place. So in many African countries, there are significant social stigma against the participation of women in public-facing arts, such as music, film, theater, and dance. And in the past, those stigma may have been linked to religious or traditional views about women's modesty. And today, underlying such stigma is often an assumption that women in these positions will receive many sexual advances. And therefore, sexual harassment perpetuates the social stigma against women participating in the arts. So just to give some figures to the weight of these phenomena, a survey I worked on women artists in the Gambia found that 1 in 5 had been subjected to sexual harassment. And in 60% of these cases, the harassment had a direct impact on a work opportunity. As for the weight of social stigma, in the report that Marta cited introducing me, so that was an African-wide study for women in the performing arts, social stigma was the second most frequently cited obstacle for women's participation in the sector after juggling domestic responsibilities. Allow me an anecdote from Nigeria to illustrate how the obstacle may play out. We all know that Nigeria's music sector is today one of the biggest in the world, brimming with potential. And I was speaking with people from one of the most reputed music business training programs, so training music executives, not artists. And they have a women's scholarship to drive up participation in what is a male-dominated industry at the music executive level. They don't always get enough applicants for these women's scholarships, and the director of the school sometimes has to call parents to convince them to let their daughters participate in this program. So the stigma around women artists is so tenacious that even the risk that parents imagine for women music executives are painted with those fears. So what can policy do? Addressing sexual harassment requires an examination of power structures, identifying those gatekeeping moments that create opportunities for sexual abuse of power, and trying to level these out a bit. So those gatekeeping moments include, for instance, programming at festivals. So I've talked to women musicians who see quotas not just as a way of getting more equal representation of women artists, but also as a way of limiting the opportunity for concert programmers to have power for sexual exploitation. So that's something that city governments can act on. In my interviews, again, in the music sector with women musicians, they've also raised some very mundane problems, like when touring, especially at the beginning of their careers when money is tight and they can't afford proper accommodation. All male bands can easily sleep in their cars, whereas women, one, they're often in bands that are mixed and more male musicians than female musicians. They find themselves sometimes in very uncomfortable situations. So that perhaps also is something that city governments can act on, certainly city infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you. You have to conclude. Like,
yeah,
just
one concluding
sentence,
sentence.
please.
So to sum up, I think the most important thing is for policy making to be attuned to the potential blind spots and to go out and talk to the women you're making policy for, aware that sometimes you'll need to send, if you don't have a woman on the team, you need to send a woman to facilitate those discussions, because in an African context, women are not going to say certain things in front of men. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Yari Kamara, for bringing out the gatekeepers that for the second time have been mentioned in this panel, and for bringing up data on the impact of cultural norms of sexual harassment and the stigma in the work of women. Now let's move to the third panelist. We have with us Karine Roland, Deputy Mayor for Culture in Paris from 2020. Karine, you have been involved in the local cultural policies in Paris since 2008. According to your experience, how are cultural policies contributing to gender equality in Paris? Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. I'm delighted to be here to talk with you about such a crucial topic. And because I want to be sharp and quick, I'll switch to French. Donc nous repassons.
So let's move back to the north, because you just talked about the south. When people talk about Paris, very often they associate the city with arts and culture. And I think it's important to go back to that as a basis, because this activity sector, this political field, culture, in Paris has a huge visibility. I'm not going to drown you in figures, but there are several hundreds of shows in Paris per week, several hundreds of large exhibitions every year, over 1,000 art galleries in Paris. The number of cultural centers is so huge that we can't even fit them all on a map whenever we try. And there is a very important element as well. There is about 10% of people in Paris who work in the cultural world. 10% of the active population, of active workers. So culture has a very strong visibility, therefore. And it is this visibility that we see in our policy, especially in our everyday lives. What we wish for in Paris is for everyone to be able to have access to what we call cultural democracy, and have access to this right on a daily basis, and not just for large events. So in this regard, culture is an incredibly strong leverage option. And you have very well said, both of you, that gender equality is key in culture. Why? Because culture is here for a representation of artistic traditions and of vernacular traditions. It's also a space for imagination. We're talking about heritage and about projection into the future. We must have all possibilities. And in that regard, with the mayor of Paris, who is one of the most strong-willed mayors, she's a woman, and she's very strong politically in favor of gender equality in France and around the world. When it comes to gender equality, that must be placed at the heart of our cultural policy. So we have this responsibility. We have this great visibility, which means that it comes with this great responsibility. And I think that if we can have national frameworks, it's local authorities that have the right scale and the right position to act. What are we doing to promote this? I'm not going to give you the whole catalogue here, but with the Paris management authorities, we work on 4 main axes. First of all, fighting against gender stereotypes. You have both mentioned that already. You have to start that very early, and you can start that very early with artistic and cultural education to make sure that young people can dance, and not just young women or young ladies, but also boys can dance. And you can also have girls playing the drums and not just boys playing drums. So early on, you can have this. And in libraries, we have great collections that can help to fight against stereotypes. we must also guarantee professional equality. In Paris, as much as possible, we try to designate people in a equal way. So whenever we have a short list for a job, we must have an equal number of men and women. And this is very important to increase visibility when it comes to decision making. We also must value female creations. So every time we help women artists nowadays, it is written in the agreement or in the contracts that programming must have an equal number of men and women, or at least try to have an equal number. And this is very important. And we have a gender equal budgeting, and that is very important. It's very easy to say we're going to do it, and then we're going to say, oh, we tried, but we couldn't do it. If nobody checks, then we can't move forward, so we have to check. And then the fourth axis with city management is the visibility of women in the public space. So it is very important to have our cultural heritage. And last year, I realized that among the dozens of public libraries we have in Paris, many libraries were called after men. There is some luck. Some libraries are just named after the street on which they sit, which means that we have this opportunity to rename them with the name of a woman. It is not innocuous. It is very important to speak about that and to act that way. So all of this, I hope, will bear fruit. This is a fight that we really want to win. And my idea when we talk about equality between men and women is the same as when we talk about sustainable development. I'll be finished in 1 minute. We want to create a virtuous circle, the virtuous circle of sustainable culture. And it starts with creation, female and male creators who do something in a space, and the space grabs it and must see whether there is gender equality. And the public authorities are there as well to check. And this all goes down to the public. And this is a virtual circle, and we have to keep at it until we manage to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karine, for mentioning the rights, the responsibility of local governments, the legal framework, and the city narratives. And now we are moving to the last speaker of this panel, Cicek Tezer. You're an architect, cultural manager, editor, and the general coordinator of the Izmir Mediterranean Academy. Izmir hosted the 4th UCLG Cultural Summit in 2021 and has put in place administrative measures to ensure the presence of women and non-binary identity persons in decision-making bodies and mainstreams the memory of women in the city. Our question for you is, what is the importance of acknowledging and making visible the contribution of women to cities and its cultural life? And referring to the Izmir Mediterranean Academy, what is the role of the Academy in this regard? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta. It's very nice to be here in the UCLG Culture Summit in Dublin. Thank you for the invitation. I'm one of the representatives of both Izmir Mediterranean Academy and Metropolitan Municipality here today. And I'm here in order to share the perspectives of both institutions. I'd like to start from Izmir Metropolitan Municipality, which really focuses on gender responsive policies. Since gender equality is essential for not only for women, for LGBTI+ and non-binary identity persons, but also for all members of the society, according to the municipality. And multifaceted and interconnected actions is crucial to reopen as a discussion, open a significant field on this very significant problematic. in Izmir Metropolitan Municipality is conducting some projects and programs according to this issue in collaboration with non-governmental organizations and chambers, with both professionals and non-professional communities. And the Metropolitan Municipality developed a local equality action plan in 2016 to ensure the presence of women and non-binary persons in decision-making processes. According to my personal reading of this action plan, there are 4 main features of this action plan to be mentioned here. The first one is policy-making process should be hand in hand with action. That's why the municipality conducts various projects within the field, in the field of action. Second feature is enlarging the discussion to international scale, as well as narrowing it down to the neighborhood scale. For instance, a project of the Metropolitan Municipality called Women Making Films in Their Neighborhood, in order to identify the problems and solutions in their own places in a local scale. And the third feature is enriching the projects while using the public space for action, like workshops, forums, etc., organized in the public space. As Karin said, it's both about the visibility of women in public space, as well as to open this discussion in the public sphere. And the fourth main feature is seeking for a controversial approach in order to change the narrative. For instance, the project of the Metropolitan Municipality called Men's and Masculinity Studies in Society and Culture, in order to transform the perception of masculinity, not the femininity. And for Izmir Mediterranean Academy, which is a directory of the municipality, and which has independent decision-making processes, we call it as a position in arm-length position with the Metropolitan Municipality. Although gender equality is not one of the main issues according to the working field of the academy, we put importance on to give the sensitivity, to consider the diversities in all sense in the processes of both project development and implementations of them. And the academy's main role is to open up a field which brings together both the cultural producers and NGOs, both within the scale of Izmir and in an international level. And of course, focusing on the main issue of the academy, Mediterranean. And within this field, first we must include actors in diversity, and second, we need both deepen the ordinary place-related things, as well as going beyond the ordinary. And what the attempt to do is providing a field of margins and encounters, which is open to the growth of ordering rather than order, which is only possible by opening by encounter of diversities, diverse identities. It's a must to consider gender equality, cultural diversity, and gender-sensitive policies.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Cizek. We have heard how Izmir is taking action and also the academy. And thank you for bringing the concept of masculinity. I think that we'll talk about it during the second panel. And now we have very brief minutes for questions and answers from the floor. Please, if you have, yes, I see there's a question there from Alessandra Shantaki.
You cannot hear me. Oh, okay, thank you. So I wanted to ask which women you were talking about in your talks, because I didn't hear anything about intersectionality and the different women. So, you know, last month I gave the award to this amazing Hartoum Dembele, 21-year-old French Muslim artist of Malian origin, who is taking photographs of women who want to continue, Muslim women who want to continue to practice their sports wearing the headscarf. So, you know, Paris may be, you know, we all have an image of women, of culture in Paris, but also of culture and women in Paris. And I wanted to hear, you know, what is the specific steps that are taken in order to begin to have a more inclusive picture and real picture of all the women in Paris that can participate freely in culture, that can have access, but also participation in culture. I want to ask about Nigeria. There is this, you know, trap culture where there are music groups that have songs that are quite good songs, but completely offensive towards women. And I was wondering, there is a very big discussion on whether the state and the local authorities should limit take measures to limit this artistic expression or not. I want to hear about Liverpool and sports. When we talk about sports, is there any discussion about trans women participating in sports in Liverpool? And I want to hear about Izmir. What is happening with the discussion? Sorry, this is not just one question. What is happening, just take it as a comment. What is happening in the, you know, which women does your organization want to represent in Izmir? The image of the progressive Turkish woman who does not wear the headscarf, the image of the more traditional woman who wears the headscarf, the image of the Kurdish woman in Turkey. So I'm trying to understand, you know, we talk about women, but women is not just one uniform issue, and there are really pressing moments that the local governments have to react that go beyond the traditional understanding, let's bring women to the table. So, you know, it would be fantastic if we can hear, if I can hear your comments either here or if
Thank you, Alessandra, for the question. I don't think that we have time for all of you to react to her comment, but if any one of you would like
to... So just a quick one. And obviously, I'm involved also with the International Olympic Committee and the whole discussion on women and sport, the notion of women. You have mentioned also the question of the trans women, and on that front, I would also like to talk about trans men, because I think we don't talk enough about trans men, and there is not enough prominent trans men examples. So a very, very important topic. Obviously, if we see also sport as a cultural phenomenon, there is a lot to be discussed with dress sense, with uniforms. I mean, a really interesting discussion of what can be done at the global umbrella level and how then this adapts to different rules in every country. No? So with Paris, it's a really interesting conversation about what is the right or wrong way to dress or represent yourself. You have mentioned Liverpool, and it's again an interesting example of a city with quite a male-dominated structure of leadership, but where very interesting conversations are occurring, especially when discussing the trans debate and the non-gender. So certainly in the UK, what we have is a lot of really advanced debates on how the right to not define yourself with a particular gender, and obviously the whole approach to using the his, he or his, her, hers. I mean, just this is now happening across the board, certainly in universities, in cultural institutions, and progressively within sporting environments, to be supportive, no, of those that might look one way and might not identify themselves with the gender that most people might consider they have. So there is a lot of work to be done, and I feel it's very, very interesting to bring how the worlds of sport and culture and the arts could help each other. Because this is certainly not a topic that can be done just in one area. We should not be fragmented there. And I think the debate, I mean, maybe, I don't know if you also want to add something, in terms of how every edition of the Games, of the Olympic Games, it's advancing the case. In Tokyo, in Japan, let's remember, we had for the first time that change of leadership. So in terms of the organizing committee for the Games, put out the CEO because of issues around gender, and for the first time you had a woman actually being appointed, and that was very, very transformative in the context of Japan. So yeah, my point would be, for instance, on that, how within the world of sport, there are very interesting debates are occurring, how you change that with the world of culture and the arts. But just also on the rights for transgender athletes.
Beatriz, I think that...
yeah, let's leave it there, but it's about physical dimensions in certain sports, so it's another conversation about biological advantages, which takes us into a really, really interesting and complicated topic too. Mm-hmm.
I think yes. We will have to leave it as a food for thought. And I will ask the audience if there is another question, just one, if there is.
Over there.
Yes? Can you introduce yourself, please?
Je suis Ferdinand Lefranc.
I am Ferdinand Lefranc, and I'm from Brazzaville. I'm going to ask a question that may seem simple, but as a woman, what do you mean by gender equality when we're talking about diversity in the cultural world?
Does anyone want to react to this question? Difficult one.
Yes. I'll attempt an answer. For me, it's quite simply equality of opportunities, and especially when you're talking about something like the cultural sector that produces the artistic expressions by which a lot of our societies create meaning, that women have an equal possibility to be producing those artistic works by which we make sense of our world.
Thank you very much, Yari. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have just finished our first panel, so I will ask for a big applause for our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I will invite the speakers of the second panel, please come to the stage. So now we have with us Catalina Valencia from Bogota, Mary McAuliffe from the University College of Dublin, Zenaida Pérez Gutiérrez from the Asamblea Nacional Política de Mujeres Indígenas, and online we have Saranya Darshini, architect from the founding member and coordinator of ICOMOS Heritage and Gender. Yes, please, take a seat. Catalina, sorry. Yes, Sí, perfecto. Thank you all, panelists. We will start this second segment. We've called it the wider dimension. Perhaps we will have enough time to widen some of the questions that have been raised during the first segment. We will start with Catalina Valencia from Bogota. I will switch to Spanish now.
You are the Secretary of Culture of Bogota, a city that is completely committed to the global feminist municipal movement, and the city is Vice President of the UCLG Committee on Culture, and you are currently working to consolidate a cultural policy for care. And our question for you, Catalina, is what actions is Bogotá taking to promote cultural policies that are focused on care? And how does this relate to gender equality and new masculinities? Thank you, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to tell you that Bogotá is the first city in Latin America that has a district care system that is about recognizing the care burden of people who work in caring for other people, which is usually and mostly women. Inside this care system, and we work in the culture section, work hard on this, we have a component of civic participation, and it's a very innovative initiative in recent times, working against gender violence, and it's called the CALM program, Programa Calma, and it has to do with the ethics and culture of care to prevent gender violence, and it contributes to the active participation of men in care work. One of the situations we realized during the pandemic was that gender-based violence and domestic violence was, we had a purple phone line, which was for women who were suffering from domestic violence or gender-based violence in the home. But there was a problem that we had not covered, and that was men. Why were men at times of difficulty, of pressure, social pressure, and anxiety in their personal lives, why were they not able to express their emotions? And so we set up this program, the CALM program, with a line especially for men. And it's strange to say this, but we wanted to produce a cultural change, allowing men to express their frustrations, their emotions, their jealousy, those different dimensions of their being in traditionally chauvinist societies. And so we wanted to focus on those men and help them to avoid committing crimes, femicide in the home or violence in the home, and so that they could talk about their emotions. So the Calma line was set up in 2020, and we have already spoken to more than 18,000 men in Bogotá. And in that way, we have avoided tragedies in people's homes. I'm going to give some figures about this phone line. 76% of men and 84% of women consider that men would like to better manage their emotions, but they don't know how. 60% of men agree that men don't really know how to ask for help when they need it. 56% believe that men prefer to take care of their own problems. We also decided in this care system that we should ask ourselves if you can learn to care for others. And in that question, under that question, we created a program of men in care, involved in care. And we decided that in our country and in our city, we realized that men see care work as something that should be done by women. Historically, that has been the way. And so we set up a kind of school based on those percentages. 40% of men in Bogotá had suffered domestic violence during their childhood, in most cases at the hands of their father. Most men recognize their parents, their fathers specifically, as an important figure as they grew up. And also 84% of women don't include love as an emotion that they feel towards their fathers. And so we worked all around Bogotá, including Ciudad Bolívar, which is a kind of marginalized area of the city with lots of migrants. And in these last few years, we have managed to change the situation so that more men are taking part in caring activities like changing nappies, cooking, and this has really helped to change attitudes of chauvinism in Bogotá. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Catalina, Secretaria de Cultura de Bogotá.
Thank you, Catalina, Secretary of Culture in Bogotá, for talking to us about this program, Calma, the phone line for men, and for telling us how, through political will and political action, we can change cultural paradigms and traditional beliefs. This is at the heart of cultural change that we all need.
I'm going to switch to English again, because now we have Mary McAuliffe, historian, lecturer, and director of gender studies of the University College of Dublin. Mary McAuliffe, you specialize in Irish women's gender history, traumas, stories, and gendered and sexual violence of Ireland's revolutionary period and histories of sexualities, and contribute to documentaries, radio, TV, news, media, and academic publications. Our question for you is two questions, in fact. What is it important to study and bring to light the memory of Irish women and the gender perspective in general regarding the cultural, socio-political, and public history of Dublin? And you can perhaps explain your activism within the Irish Women's Museum Advocacy Group and other cultural initiatives aimed at forefronting and celebrating women. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And I'm very delighted to be here with you today. And perhaps, as I've just got 5 minutes, I will answer those by using two examples. The first, the Irish women and a gendered perspective in social and cultural public history here in Dublin. We have just completed what we in Ireland called our Decade of Centenaries. In fact, last Friday was the closing ceremony in Dublin Castle. It's been ongoing since 2012. And it is looking back over 100 years at the campaigns for the female vote, which was given in Ireland in 1918, as we were part of the British Empire then. The rise of the trade union activism, in which very, very many women were involved. The 1916 Rising, again trying to free Ireland. Then the War of Independence, 1919 to 21. The Irish Civil War, which was a very short one, and the foundation of the Irish Free State in 1921, which then becomes the Irish Republic, the state we know today. I've been very much involved in that, and from the beginning there was a sense that women were not going to be included. So due to the activism of myself and a number of other cultural creators, historians and academics, we campaigned to have women central to the Decade of Centenaries. And I can say, as we come out of that decade now, we were very successful. Women's stories, the stories of revolutionary women, socialist women, trade union activists, of women who fought, suffragettes who fought for the right of the female vote, have successfully been central to the Decade of Centenaries. And now I doubt you could write a history of Ireland's revolutionary decade without including women. One of the first things that happened was in 2013, a huge campaign got underway from a number of young activists, Labour Party activists and left-wing activists, mainly women, to call a new bridge over the River Liffey, which is just a couple of blocks away, after a young working-class trade union activist and Irish rebel, Rosie Hackett. And that was successful despite the fact that she was up against W.B. Yeats. Some of you may have heard of him, a Nobel Prize-winning poet, James Connolly, a senior socialist leader. So that campaign really integrated an intersectional view of class, and young women and gender. My own research on both sexual violence against women during the War of Independence and on queer revolutionaries, queer female revolutionaries, has been published to date. So we're taking this intersectional lens. Part of that campaign has been about marking spaces around Dublin. including putting up plaques. And we've been very successful on that. About a year ago, a plaque went up to Dr. Kathleen Lynn and her lifelong partner, Madeleine French-Mullen, both of whom were rebels in the revolutionary period. The other aspect of that question, the importance of representation. A group of us came together about 5 years ago and set up the Irish Women's Museum Advocacy Group. And we campaigned and wrote letters and got in touch with the government. To cut a long story short, a couple of months ago, the Minister who deals with culture in this country, Catherine Martin, agreed to set up an advisory group to explore the setting up of a women's museum, but also to do a gender deep dive into what the existing museums have in their collections and see what's there, because in many ways they don't really know what's there in terms of representing women. And if they know, they can then put on exhibitions that more represent, in an intersectional way, what women have contributed and LGBT people have contributed to our society. And I'm delighted to say that we have done a lot in this country in terms of gender representation. There has been huge interaction and collaboration between cultural creators, artists, musicians, dancers, theatre makers, and academics throughout the decade of centenaries, particularly under the auspices of what was called the Countess Markievicz Artistic Award, where a number of artists each year got quite a significant grant, €25,000, to collaborate with historians to represent women in the revolutionary decade and beyond, because we're now entering into their afterlives in the new Irish Free State. Very conservative state, so, you know, we have to look at how the radical promise of the revolution was betrayed and how second wave feminism had to really begin that struggle all over again in the 1970s. So in many ways, in Ireland, we are ahead of the game in terms of cultural representation of women, but there's still a lot of work to do, including all the things that were mentioned in the first panel about gender representation and here on this panel as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary McAuliffe, for illustrating with two concrete examples and for widening the topics of intersectionalism and representation from local activities here in Dublin. Thank you very much. I'm going to switch again to Spanish to introduce Nacional Política de Mujeres Indígenas, ANPMI, que está integrada por redes
from the National Political Assembly of Indigenous Women with a network of women and other networks. And she's a leader with the UCLG of the Action Plan of Equality in Feminist Movements and Leadership. She's in charge of training for women that are Indigenous and young Indigenous women. Welcome. Now, from your approach, which are the challenges when you want to move forward towards gender equality for Indigenous women, and what are the next steps? And you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for the space and the territory that is welcoming. Here I'm from the Ayuk Indigenous people from Mexico, and we have a history and legacy from our ancestors, and we have to thank the place we are in at the moment. I would like to thank as well the UCLG and Emilia for keeping us, inviting us to be part of this space for dialogue. It has been difficult and challenging to be here as Indigenous women. It's difficult to be in the same panels and to be able to listen and to give feedback. That's why I think I'm going to be contributing and I'm going to try to represent our network. We try to see where there's more invisibility. We have been talking about equality, intersection. There's another term which I would like to mention here, racism. Indigenous women, we are fighting within our communities, and we are fighting in a racist society that is imposing a prototype of person, which is the person that has value with certain physical features. And anything that is different has less value, or doesn't think. it's a minor. So what we want to do is work in the cinema. We have some indigenous women that are making cinema in Mexico, trying to change the narrative, trying to change the storytelling in the mass media, and mainly in the publicity concerning indigenous women. Some other are in the academy, others are doing political participation, trying to change the storytelling, trying to show which is the capacity that we have as indigenous women. In the Assembly, we have written a book about us, not very strict in terms, but very valuable to be able to register our memory. I was listening to a historian, and it's so valuable that ourselves, we can write about ourselves, not what the others are thinking or interpreting ourselves. We write about our lives, and that has been very valuable. What do we need now? We need to have visibility, to give it a name, to acknowledge it, and I think it is important as well, and it has been mentioned this morning and yesterday, that we need to be seen beyond folklore. Indigenous populations and First Nations, and of course where women are, we contribute beyond what is more visible, like our outfits, our fabrics, because we have a different way of seeing the world or facing climate change, we have heard before, a different way of solving problems. We saw it with COVID. We have traditional medicine, which is very valuable when we need to, when we cannot access the medical system, when we have this kind of a contagion. The work of women helping to the delivery at birth, that's very important. When we were saying, what do we have to add in the culture? In the indigenous population, and mainly from the women's perspective, I think that we are contributing to an axis that hasn't been mentioned yet, spirituality, our link with the environment, with the other beings, with the other elements that create and give us life. How could we do it? Is there a roadmap to give more dignity to the representation of people and women in public spaces? I wanted to share with you an example. That's from an artisan woman from my community, from the Mija people. We can organize exhibitions talking about the different patterns that you can see. This space, the embroidery, that's the river. That's the river, and the sun is in the middle. So it's showing our relationship with nature beyond saying, I'm going to buy this shawl. No, there's a whole history behind it. And women have been devoting time to make it. We have been talking about care work. We have to remember that, yes, we are women, and we suffer violence, gender-based violence, but we need to take into account racism and how we face it, which makes things worse. We see how indigenous women suffer even more the violence, and there's less access to different opportunities that we enjoy as people, as citizens, but especially when we talk about indigenous women. It is very important to listen to that. So we have to go back to our countries, go in depth and see what happens in our countries. Are there still indigenous populations? In Mexico, we have 68 indigenous people, so 68 different ways of seeing the world, 68 different ways of trying to tackle challenges, the current challenges and the ones that we'll have in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Zenaida, for bringing on to debate the issue of racism and how it is linked with the values within the communities, and for talking about the acknowledgement of the indigenous knowledge and changing. We have to change of our the way we see things. And thank you for bringing tangible elements of your culture to your debate. Thank you very much. And she's moving into English.
This panel, it is, I think, online. I don't know if she's ready. It is, she is Ananaya Darsini, architect, founding member and coordinator of ICOMOS Heritage and Gender. Hello, thank you for being here. Welcome. Your work is focused on preserving heritage sites and traditional practices in India and the UK. And you have written, I read, about water heritage and women, for example. Our question for you is, heritage is a masculine construct mainly. How does ICOMOS address gender equality? Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you for your question. To start with, to say heritage is a masculine construct is itself a bold assertion. And this is one of the reasons why our task team within ICOMOS called Heritage and Gender was established in 2021. The reason is to bring recognition to women who have dedicated their careers to heritage but have remained faceless, serving as unsung heroes. Our aim, the team's aim, is to address and acknowledge the underrepresented histories and stories of women and sexual minorities in heritage. ICOMOS general program for 2021-23 identifies gender issues, especially SDG 5, as one of the important topics that should be discussed and debated. In September 2023, at the ICOMOS General Assembly in Sydney, we voted for a historic resolution on gender diversity for ICOMOS. This resolution was proposed by the task team with support of several national committees, scientific committees, and individual members. This resolution will further push for gender equity in membership and leadership positions and on research related to heritage practices and management systems. As a prelude to this resolution was the research that was undertaken by the task team, soon to be published as part of a Rutledge handbook. To give you an example of gender parity in ICOMOS, in 2008, the representation of women on the ICOMOS board increased to about 30%, and since 2017, parity has been achieved. In 2020, Teresa Patricio became the first women president of ICOMOS in 50 years. But at the same time, we are also aware of committees with more women than men, and we are also researching on best practices where parity has been achieved, but also gender imbalances are prevalent. As we also plan to research on what the attributes to these cultural stereotypes within the heritage profession where these imbalances are occurring. The plan is also to understand whether such imbalances are linked to issues such as low wages and better workplace safety for women and sexual minorities. As part of the ongoing global discussion on the diversification of representation in heritage sites, LGBTQ+ people and histories have become an important component of the efforts of several national committees, including Spain, who have established a working group on cultural heritage and LGBTQ+ memory sites. As they say, it's all looks upwards and onwards, or is it? So on the other side of it, we also see disparity within ICOMOS. There are two ways to recognize heritage professionals within conservation profession for their achievements by awarding them the Gazzola Prize or conferring honorary memberships. So far, only a handful of women have received either of these recognitions. Data from last year states that 3 out of 14 Gazzola prizes went to women, and only 14 out of 104 honorary memberships were conferred to women. To wrap up my answer in bringing it in short, is that it's important to remember that heritage influences society's sense of identity, ethics, worldviews. It is an important tool to empower all genders, transform gender dynamics, and provide an inclusive participation platform at all levels of decision making. But on the other side of this discourse, heritage can also be considered discriminatory, with gender stereotypes rooted in century-old traditions and practices. Ongoing research, policy adjustments, and collaborative efforts underscore ICOMOS's commitment to fostering gender equality and diversity in the field of heritage conservation. Now that the gender diversity resolution has been adopted, the task team is working on its implementation. A crucial milestone will be to present an updated report on gender equality and diversity in ICOMOS, as well as gender practices in the profession as at the 22nd General Assembly in 2026. We hope there's a significant improvement in the numbers by then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Saranya Darsini. Thank you for bringing to the table the huge effort of ICOMOS to address and acknowledge the contribution of women, of heritage professionals. Thank you for also mentioning the gender diversity resolution, and for also mentioning how is ICOMOS promoting female leaderships through the image of Teresa Patricio, its president. I think that now we can start the second Q&A segment. We had a lot of inputs, and perhaps the audience can make some questions to our panelists. No, anyone? Yes, we have some hands. Three.
Hello, my name is Kat O'Driscoll. I'm a city councillor here in Dublin, and I am the chair of the Arts and Culture Committee for the city. My question is about quotas, which have proved slightly controversial in Ireland, but I think are a success story. When we talk about cultural institutions and policies, there is a decision-making space, places that award funding, set direction, and it was great to hear from ICOMOS about the engagement of different perspectives within your decision-making pieces. So from the panel, what are your opinion on the use of quotas? Is it a tool you've seen used, or is it something that should be looked at? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kat O'Driscoll. Perhaps we can go to another question and then try to answer all of them. Yes, please.
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Ali Curran and I'm the chair of the Irish Museum of Modern Art, and it's a coincidence that you're getting two Irish questions, one after the other, but they are related actually. I was very interested in the speaker who was talking about the intersectionality between racism and gender. And as we develop as a country and our diversification grows, it's something that institutions like the Irish Museum of Modern Art are considering. You know, what is our responsibility to our citizens when our citizen profile and demographic is changing so rapidly? And I would welcome any of the experienced comments from the speakers panel in relation to that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that we had another question from the audience. Yes, over there.
Merci.
Thank you. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Ferdinand Riqueda, and I come from Brazzaville. I have a concern, and I would like to talk to the speaker before last. As an indigenous woman, I think that you really understand and know the life of indigenous women. Do you feel right and well when you look at your traditions and at your life? Because sometimes we have the idea that everybody should think the same way, and the happiness of others depends on the look given by others. But when you are in your own community and you look at your own traditions, at your own customs, do you think that your traditions and your customs are good for your own existence? Do they match your expectations of a good life?
Thank you very much, Ferdinand from Brazzaville. I think we can start trying to answering these questions. Who would like of you to answer to the questions of quotas asked by Kat O'Driscoll?
Okay. Yes. Perhaps I'll answer those two questions. I think quotas have worked politically. Obviously, we've had quotas at our national election level, national parliament level for a few years now, and it has increased the representation of women. I am not adverse to quotas on boards or on groups who would maybe be creating exhibitions. I think we have to be very aware, though, that it's not just gender quotas. There have to be diversity of experience and contribution as we go forward, which then kind of replies to your question about, you know, representing new populations within any country, but referring to this country, as somebody who has been doing gender history for a very long time, but now see it through more of an intersectional lens about class, identity and sexuality, also will have to begin to look at it about ethnicity and race, because these are all new populations. I think 20% of our population in the last 20 years is non-Irish born at this stage, which is a huge increase. And obviously there are some difficulties at some of the population in dealing with that, but I think our cultural institutions can lead the way in how we respond positively and how we respond effectively to the changing populations, and that can only be a good thing. So I would say yes to quotas and yes to being more and more diverse, because of course it makes for a more interesting story as well.
Thank you very much, Mary McAuliffe. Zenaida, you want also to answer to this question?
Yes, talking about quota, in Mexico, we have implemented quotas in the political participation in the legislative power. How many seats can we have in the parliament? The few that we have achieved has been thanks to the processes of those groups that are not properly represented, that are sub-represented, like indigenous people. When there's a quota for indigenous population, we have as well gender. So half of it or more has to be for women indigenous. This has been a big challenge. I don't know whether that happens everywhere, but in Mexico we have a political party system according to which every party wants to gain a space and power, and they cannot have the others being involved, because then they cannot have control and they cannot impose their agenda. So they're taking over, they're using this place that has been assigned to the indigenous for its own people with corruption. So they can say that that person is from the indigenous population, but mainly that's someone that is part of the political party. So this is a challenge, but it's a way to compensate, to reaffirm, and it is essential while we try to achieve equality, meaning we are all human beings. So we all should have the same opportunities. In the university and in the academia, quotas have been used to have more indigenous people having access to universities, which is very difficult. You live in a small communities, you don't live in the city. It is difficult. So there are some quota to ensure that you're going to be there in the university world and you can finish your studies. So I think it is essential. But that's not the end. We have to move forward. We have to think all those that get a degree, that they finish their postgrad, what are they going to do? They don't have the same network of contact of those that come from better families or from the cities. So we need to focus beyond. We need to see it in a more holistic way. And then there are quota in the arts and in the culture to have talent coming from the indigenous communities that can be accessing all the spaces. They can have residency programs in different areas. So they can create art from their vision of the cosmos with their own languages. And that can be very useful for those that are not aware of it, can acknowledge different types of art and contributions coming from the indigenous people. Now, moving to your last question, you feel comfortable with your identity and your culture? Yes, of course, because that's why I mentioned what we contribute with as indigenous women within our culture, within our land. And I was talking about this system of knowledge. As I mentioned before, I felt racism, and very often we deny our identity. But then when we find people where we can feel part of a community, even if it's not our community, then we can claim back our identity. And I think it's great to be able to use our language to be part of a culture that maybe outside is seen as a minority. But when we have a sense that we are many more. I was talking about 68 indigenous people in Mexico, so we're a fourth of the population. And I think this is very valuable, and we have to be visible. When I bring these blankets that people from my land are making, I feel proud about it. because they go beyond our land. We can show it in different spaces. And I think that always, like in any other culture, we have to face challenges within our culture. But we are in a capitalistic, chauvinistic system. As a small people, we still have, or we have as well the same issues. All bad vices can be spread. So within inside, we need to talk about it in the small cultures as well as in large societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zenaida. Perhaps Catalina Valencia or Saranya want to also react?
If I may just add to the first question, yes, I do agree to my fellow panelists what they have mentioned. But I would also like to mention further to that is that it's very important to keep the equality. The balance is very essential. As I mentioned, that we are also seeing a trend in more number of women being in this profession. This should not lead to stereotyping, and that's something that it's not just like you have achieved a goal and that's the end goal, but it's going to be something that your goalpost will keep moving, and we need to keep working. And as a global organization, we identify that there are different national committees, scientific committees come with different imbalances or balances, and how you work with that, it's quite essential. So I think that should be kept in mind when you are working with gender equality in all its sense, in any profession in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Catalina Valencia, please.
Sí, como lo decía esta mañana.
Yes, as I was saying this morning, when we were talking about environment, one of the cultural changes we've had in Colombia, and specifically in Bogotá, is that for many years, women have had the right to vote, but then finally we got our first lesbian woman mayor, and that's very important. So it's not just quotas. We have a quota law to try and promote equity and make sure that women are involved at a political level, but it's more about the cultural change that citizens have mobilized to vote for that woman mayor. In a chauvinist society which has always been dominated by male power, we now have an Afro-Colombian woman vice president for the first time in our history, and so I think we're taking a step into the unknown. But these are very important steps for women and their involvement in politics in our capital city. There's a lot more to do, but the cultural change is not just about the quotas, but in popular elections that there can be more women involved. So that's a political change in my country and in my city. I think the first woman mayor in Bogotá, Claudia López, is not going to be the last. She is the first one, but she's not going to be the last one. And so that opens a very important door in terms of national policy, national politics, and in terms of city politics around the world. And I also want to add something that I omitted earlier on about the care system. As we have a woman mayor, she, in her campaign, was talking about how can we change the situation of opportunities in a city of 8 million people, and there are big gaps in terms of women's opportunities in work, in politics. They're always responsible for care activities for our elders, for our children. So what can we do about the system so that even in those everyday tasks that we can change our attitudes towards them as citizens? Thank you.
Catalina Valencia.
Thank you, Catalina Valencia.
or the immediate future of your city, Bogota. And precisely, I would like to ask you, dear speakers, about the immediate future of your region, of your city. How do you see your city in the next 5 years, perhaps, in terms of cultural policies and gender equality?
All of us?
Yes.
There's been a lot of discussion about Dublin and culture and heritage in the last few years through the national media, through cultural creators, through involvement of citizens. There's been a campaign which faltered at times and maybe revived to have a directly elected mayor of the city. And there is a sense that investment in the city itself and its infrastructure and its built heritage is lacking. But Dublin has always had a very I suppose, attended and well-balanced cultural aspect to its character. We have some great cultural institutions with museums. All of our national museums are free to enter, so there is real engagement from the public. Our galleries and spaces like that. There has been campaigns to name spaces and create a more equitable public memorialization of women and of the working class within the city. I think like any other big city throughout the world, it has its challenges, particularly with regards to the rise in populism, climate change, a bit of the rise of the far right. Well, more than a bit, they're becoming quite vocal. All of that sort of thing. But in many ways, Dublin is an old city and has overcome many challenges throughout its centuries. And I have hope for the future of this city. I'm not a native Dubliner. I came here to work when, initially as a student and then ended up working here. But it is a city I'm very fond of. And I think it is a grand city. It's in many ways a really great city, but it has its challenges. And I think culture is part of the way we respond to those challenges, to inclusion, to the growth, unfortunately, in racism and opposition to migrants and opposition to ethnic minorities in the country, to the continuing impacts of misogyny and sexism in our society, to, again, the unfortunate growth in transphobia, and that is leading to a broader increase in homophobia in society. But I feel that through good politics and good policies, but also through cultural representation and inclusion, we can meet those challenges head on. And we have to, the biggest challenge of all, of course, for all of us globally, is climate change. And I think through our cultural creators, artists, academics like myself, that we meet those challenges head on, and that we continue to work for inclusion for all, and to resist the inequalities that come with climate change, with racism, with homophobia and transphobia and misogyny. And I believe that in many ways Dublin will be able to do that, but we keep having to campaign that it does happen.
Thank you very much. Tenaida, please.
Bueno, pienso en
I think of three things. There is a general recommendation, number 39, which is that when Indigenous women generate knowledge, that should be read, it should be made available with their anti-racist perspectives to see how they want to be treated in public policy in all the different dimensions that we've discussed. It's very detailed, and I think it would be valuable to read that. In second place, and this may be relevant to other territories too, The linguistic policy is very important. So minority languages. There are small initiatives, but when I visited the Basque Country, it was great to see that there are street names using different languages, using the original languages or indigenous languages in public spaces. I forgot to thank the interpreters because thanks to that diversity and to learning different languages, we can all communicate and understand one another. And so in our territories, it would be really good if, apart from the official languages, we could understand some people who speak indigenous languages, visit their territories and understand something about where their knowledge comes from. And thirdly, I think in the short and also the medium and long term, I would like to think that we're in a society that will recognize Indigenous women as contributing wisdom, that they are creators, maintaining the art, memory, and heritage of their peoples and their society. Thank you, Zanaida. Saraña y Catalina, ¿quieren comentarlo? Bueno, ya lo ha mencionado, el futuro inmediato de la ciudad. Saraña, ¿qué perspectiva tiene para la ciudad en los próximos 2, 3, 5 años? Bueno,
different cities, I would actually, what I would like to see, and through ICOMOS that we are also trying to do, is bringing, the underrepresented histories and stories of women and sexual minorities in heritage to the upfront, highlighting them, because as we see tangible heritage as built in the built form, there are so many histories and layers of histories with these buildings that's often goes unknown, and it's not often represented through the gender lens. And that is something is very important, because you would have the sense of custodianship and a relation with the built heritage through these lens, which would allow your city and the people also to connect with it, being, in many ways. So I feel that is very important. Another layer to this would be for listing of heritage sites itself. We often don't see this happening, where the history of women who have been designers and artisans who have worked on many buildings in the past, but we don't really hear about them. That is something that we should be knowing about, and that is where I do see the histories and stories in any city around the world, that we would know more about it, we would learn more about it. In the UK itself, you have the blue plaque, the concept where you do come across LGBTQ plus sites, and you are aware of the history about the building itself, and that gives you a connection to a site. So that is where I would see my that top priorities in that sense, to know more about people and places.
Thank you very much. If there aren't any more questions from the floor, no. Okay. I would like now to conclude, to bring the words of Farida Shahid to this debate, namely the key lessons from What It Works that are written in the report, Cultural Action Supporting Gender Equality in Cities and Territories. It's six lessons. First one, ensure there is a gender equality unit in the municipal structure, empowered with human resources, budgets, and decision-making. Prepare a comprehensive transversal gender equality strategy, collecting data, etc. Third, transform one or more iconic and symbolic events of the city to be gender inclusive in terms of attendance, but also in terms of themes. Fourth, support new narratives for example, researching her stories. 5, promote women's creativity and gender equality discourses, providing training, establishing competitions. And finally, 6, shift notions of masculinities with citywide staff training courses, encourage new masculinities through helplines, media, theater, performances, etc. I think that these recommendations that are in the report resonate very well with what has been debated here today. Both panels have been really inspiring. I want to thank very much the panelists. And we have heard about some of the words we've heard: indigenous women, stereotypes, cultural norms, city narratives, imaginaries, tradition, inclusion, visibility, female leadership, quotas, racism linked to identity, care, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia, masculinities, representation, heritage, pride, opportunities, gatekeepers, language, memories, violence, climate change, among others. But I will pick one of the phrases that we have heard today, and it's from you, Mary McAuliffe, to end this session, and it is, "I have hope for the future." Thank you very much.
Good morning, or good afternoon. Just 2 small housekeeping pieces of information before we break for lunch, which will be served outside. You will all have received, or should have received, information on the cultural programme that we offered this evening, including Ali Curran. There is an invitation to join some of the people who will be in IMA this evening for a new exhibition that opens on shared identity. And you will also have the opportunity to visit some of the places described and spoken about last night and yesterday evening in the Lord Mayor's speech to the room. So there are a number of people around with staff written on the end, and they all have the booking system, because there's obviously a finite number of places per activity, and they will book you in. So please do avail of that over the lunchtime period, and there will be meeting points after this evening's session at 5:45 to go to all of the places. We'll have you back in the centre of town by 9 p.m. at the latest, unless you all fall into bad company and then decide to stay out very late. The other thing I would like to say is this afternoon's session in this room is Heritage for today and tomorrow. We have a pretty jam-packed afternoon, and so we need to keep a little bit of manners on ourselves in terms of timekeeping. So if I could have everybody back here for 2:15, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, I'll have to chase you around the foyer outside and herd you back in. So it's not nice that I might have to do that, but I will do it. So if you could, off you go now and enjoy your lunch and have the chats. Thanks very much.